Thank you, Rudy, and good day to everyone. And thank you all to have been involved in such a wonderful presentation, symposium, and allowing me to do this talk. This brief talk, because archiving is not a simple topic, was based on a workshop I did in Clarence in March this year for the Clarence Heritage Association. So apologies to those who were attending there. It's very similar. Now, archiving, what is it, and why are we doing it, and where do we start? A basic outline will be, we'll look at an introduction and some definitions, the purpose, use, and then we will focus on what do we do with the material. Yes, we'll mainly focus on hard copy copies, letters, diaries, papers, but the same process can work for your electronic documents as well, because that's what we store today. Oops, sorry, wrong way. Why do we archive? We're all used to storing this, right? Stuff in boxes. We're all used to things on the left. And that's generally what happens when we get stuff in an archive is, here's the box of stuff I've found in the cupboard, under the bed, in the garage. And you say, right. But the aim of what we want to get is to the right. We want to get it organized and sorted so that people can utilize the information. Let's start with some definitions. We've got two definitions here. One from Wikipedia, which is sometimes not very reliable, but pretty good as a starting point. And the next is the more formal one from the International Council of Archives. And I believe you all can read, so I'm not going to read it for you. As we can see, both definitions have similar concepts, with the main one being that an archive is a place where items are stored together for people to access in order to preserve the history of a specific time, place, event, or group of people. So we have our material in our boxes and we're going to create an archive. Before we suddenly start putting an exhibition together, displaying the material, or utilizing it, we need to have some aspects we focus on as to understand and ensure that everyone within the archive or museum, I'm using archive collectively, it could be a museum, it could be an association, just a room, a library, it's just easier, that everyone in the archive has the same thoughts and understanding of what the collection contains and why we have it. To start with, one of the big things would be to have a collections development policy. This is a document which sets out why the collection in total exists. What is the aim, the raison d'etre? How it will be managed and utilized, how new material will be obtained if needed, or is it going to be a closed collection, and if needed, how the material will be disposed of. On the screen, you'll see a section from a blog post called How to Create an Archive, and this provides some insight into these questions. It also helps guide you in creating your own collection development policy, which is very unique to each institution. As an example, this is the mission of the Brenthurst Library. I will be using a couple of examples from the library as that's where I'm from. The main mission is to build and enhance the collection, to preserve and maintain them, and to share the contents of the knowledge and to disseminate knowledge. It's not very long, it's fairly easy to understand, and everyone who works at the library gets to know this. And we then have a common understanding and purpose of why we work with what we work with. Archives. So we've got the high-level definitions, but what is an archive? Now we're going to focus more on the handling of the material and the processes it will go through. So we know that an archive can be a collection of items relating to a specific time, place, person, or event, or a collection of the above. It can only be in one format, such as books or photographs, or a collection of formats, and you'll have a mixture of books, letters, diaries, photographs, artworks, objects, and all of these tell a story. Generally, if you've only got books in your collection, you wouldn't refer to it as an archive, you would refer to it as a library. We'll start with the physical arrangement because that's the most obvious. We've got these papers, we've got these boxes, how do we sort them? We'll start with two types of arrangement. We've got the physical and the electronic. So when we look at the physical arrangement, we need to focus on things of types of storage for different materials. Can photographs be kept open? Can watercolors be kept on the wall? Books need shelves. Do maps go on shelves or do they go in drawers? And do we need oversized spaces for objects which are very big? If we've got a couple of African pots or a searchlight from a World War blockhouse, it's not going to fit on a normal bookshelf. We need to be aware of things like that. The electronic arrangement focuses more on our record keeping and our searching and our catalogue. How can we retrieve the information and store it? We also need to focus on internal access versus external access. Part of our policy is, will the catalogue be available to the general public, or is it only for internal use? And even with internal use, does everyone need access to all the information or only certain information? And that all develops and determines how you'd process this. With the physical arrangement, there are a few areas that we need to focus on, such as respect des fonts, keeping the order of the collection, and grouping like with like. Do we do it chronological or alphabetical, etc.? Respect des fonts. I'm going to describe that a little bit more because it's a bit of a concept. The idea here is that the collection or group of papers you get, you should store in the order you received it. So if we take Prof. Kathy's collection of research over the years, she'll have it arranged and stored in her library at home in a specific way. If she hands it into an archive for safekeeping, the ideal would be to keep that collection in that same method and store it like that. But it's not always easy. Let me give you an example. Part of the contents of the Brenthurst Library are we keep the family archives. And under Respect des fonts, when Harry Oppenheimer passed away, then they cleared out the house, there was a section of documents brought down and said, these were from Harry's bedroom. So in the catalogue, the listing is documents from Harry's bedroom. In this collection, we've got passports, we've got birth certificates, we've got letters to and from family members, we've got letters to and from social contemporaries, business contemporaries, business profiles, ephemera, a real mixture of documents, which is fine. Except a few years later, they found some more documents and they needed to send them down. And in trying to integrate these new documents into the numbering system, it didn't work because there was just no scope for the numbering. And so we've had to renumber or rearrange the whole collection. So sometimes you can do respect des fonts, which is the ideal, but it is not always possible. And it's been a whole process now of about the last 7 years that we have been renumbering and reorganizing the family papers to fit into a new organization. So within the library, we have different organization arrangements for different formats. Our books are arranged by Dewey. Fairly simple. Most of us are aware of Dewey Decimal System if we've used a public library within South Africa. Non-fiction books are arranged by Dewey, so the same process. Our pamphlets, our artworks, our audiovisual and maps are all arranged consecutively. So it would be by format. So it starts at number 1 and is stored, arranged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, except if it's an oversized item, which is then stored on a different format because it's easier. Our general manuscripts we do consecutively, whereas the family archive is stored by person and then by grouping, whether it be legal documents, life documents, which starts at birth and ends at death and covers birth, education, relationships, schooling, military service if necessary, retirement from business, birthdays and anniversaries. Then there'll be one for correspondence, business investments, and finance. So it's dependent on what's what. Whatever system you determine, you need to make sure it is logical and it can grow. You don't want to put yourself into a system that you can't add to it and it's awkward to maintain. Arrangement. So here we're going to look at a few or two of the main standards that you can use to arrange your collection to make it accessible. This is to ensure standardization and the ability, if you've got a database and you want to make your database accessible to others, that the two databases can talk to each other. So we will be focusing on Dewey and DAX, but others are Dublin Core, MARC, and RDA. Dewey. We all know Dewey's system. We've come across the 3 numbers, 968.221, which would be the number for Johannesburg. Some history on Dewey. It was designed in 1876, where Melville Dewey decided he wanted to group sort the whole of natural knowledge of that time, and he divided it into 10 main groupings. These were then subdivided into the 100 subdivisions and then further subdivided into the 1,000. It is now currently in Dewey 23, which is in 4 volumes, but you can also get an electronic subscription. DAX. This would be new for most of you. DAX means Describing Archives, a content standard. It gives you a breakdown or guideline of what you should include when looking at an archive and what should be recorded per document. It is now in the 19th iteration, and surprisingly enough, it is freely available on the American Society of Archivists website to download. And it's a fairly good document in that it explains or describes under what is meant by title, what is meant by creator, what is meant by date, and how you should record it so that your document is retrievable. When we move to location, I'm not talking about the physical location of your archive or library or museum, but here we look at the location of the material within the archive so that it is retrievable. Because it's all very well sorting your documents, putting them on the shelf, and then not knowing, I know somewhere on that bookshelf I've got a book, and not being able to find it. I'm sure we've all experienced that. So here, it's recording, making sure of where your location is, recording it on your catalog record so that it does reduce the time spent looking for it. Things do get misfiled. I'm not disputing that. It's an issue we find at the library as well. But the idea is that you know where it should be kept. But yes, my sister moans regularly in that her own library is like, it takes me quicker to look on Google Books to find the document than on my own shelf. What can I do? She's a historian by profession. Right. Moving on, electronic arrangements. It's not a very long presentation, but there'll be time, I think, for questions, which is where the discussion is. Under electronic arrangement, we're focusing here on accessioning, record keeping or cataloging, and then creating of finding aids. So we need to start with an accessions register. Everything that comes into your archive needs its own unique number. If I'm going to use Prof. Kathy's collection again that she's donated, it would get a overall number saying manuscript number 1. But every document, item, book, photograph within that collection needs its own number. Because it's all good and well saying manuscript 1 is Prof. Kathy Munro's papers, but we need to know how many papers, pages, or documents are in that collection, and each item needs its own number as well, so that it is unique and is find retrievable. And if you want to digitize or you want to comment on the conservation, you're not looking at manuscript 1, number 1, but you can say manuscript number 1, document 1, page 5. So you can be more specific. Recording and cataloging. A catalog is effectively creating a substitute record for the document. You keep your catalog in one place, you keep your document in a second place. The two do not see each other again, but you need the one to find the other. And a finding aid is supporting material for your document. So, accessioning. As I've said, each document needs its own unique number, but what do we include in an accessions register? We need to include the number, the creator of the item, it could be the title, the author, it could be the artist, the photographer, it could be the collector. So if it's something like Kathy's documents, sorry, Kathy, she would be the compiler or collector of the collection, because in that there will be different material by different people. The title of the work, here it could be a comprehensive title, or it could be the title of a specific document. If you have to create a title, such as for an artwork or a photograph or a manuscript, please make it logical. We're finding in the catalogue at the moment, we've got documents titled Papers 1945. And that means very little. Whereas if we've got papers or correspondence between the Earl of Durban and Piet Pompey's 1945, we know what we're looking at. It's more descriptive. So make your title make sense and not just papers. The number of items. Here you want to do a brief listing of, there's 30 photographs, there's 3 albums, there's 2 books, there's 4 pages to the letter. There's 6 letters, 4 pages each, so that you've got an idea of how big your collection is, or that manuscript or document collection is. The supplier, where you got the material from, that's whether you bought it or it was donated. You do need to record where you received it from, the date. Your accessions date here might be different from the date it arrived in the archive. I can say from Bookside, we order a book, it arrives, but I do not necessarily get to accession it that date. So it might only be formally accessioned into the library in 3 weeks, a month's time, although it's been sitting in the library, but it's not been dealt with. So your date is the date that it formally becomes part of your organization's assets or document collection. The cost of your item if you've bought it. This is important for valuation purposes, insurance purposes, replacement if anything happens to it. But also, again, your accessions register could include things that are gifts or donations. Now, your finance department, if you bought stuff, would have on their assets register everything you've paid for. But if you get given a document or a collection as a donation or a gift, they haven't had to pay money out for that. Where do you record that detail? It goes into your accessions register. And depending on the type of collection you've got, you might find one accessions register is sufficient for everything, whether it be books, documents, manuscript material, letters, diaries, photographs, slides, etc. Or you might need an accessions register per item. And there is a very brief example of what detail we record in an accessions register. It's very simple. All right. Moving on to the cataloguing and recording. This is the more complex section, the more detailed, time-consuming section, because we now need to physically take the record and create our substitute item. So we can do this in a database format, we can do it in Word, or we can use an Excel spreadsheet. Generally, Word is not suitable because you would then have a document per record, which is great for your finding aid. But if you're looking in a hurry to see what books have we got on Middleburg, it's not going to be that easy. So Excel works very well for that, or a database if you've got. What do we need to include in our catalogue record? We need the accessions number because we need to know how to retrieve it. The creator of the work, whether that be the author, the photographer, etc. The title of the work, so that same title we used in the accessions register, we can move into our catalogue record. The production or creation or publication date. Generally, books have publication dates, artworks, photographs, manuscripts have production or creation dates because they weren't formally published. The physical description. Here you would detail how many pages in a book, how many letters, how many photographs, what type of document, if there's illustrations, if it's a colloidal silver print, if it's postcards, and then the size in centimeters. So you have an idea of the height of the item. Because remember, your material in your collection can range from a postage stamp through to an oversized A0 map or poster, depending on what you're collecting. Notes, I will go through in a bit more detail. These are generally cataloger created to help add information to the collection or to the document. Subjects are very critical. These are your search terms that you would put or assign to the item so that they can be retrieved. The location within the archive of where it is stored, and the ideal would be to have these searchable. You want to be able to do a search on all of them. Free text, ideal. Under the notes, we've got 2 slides of what notes we would want to look at. We can include things such as the provenance. So yes, we bought the book from Bibliophile, but in the book there's a book plate of Paul Kruger. So therefore we could say that Paul Kruger possibly, he owned the book. That is important from a historical value. If we've had number changes, such as what we've been doing in the library, we want to record the original accession number, but over time it's gone from a general number to a manuscript number to a pamphlet number, however we've readjusted, and we record those details. Links to related material, whether it be the Wikimedia stuff, whether it other books within the library or your archive, or external material that is relevant. A detailed contents. So for books, we don't necessarily do a detailed contents unless I'm highlighting specific images or engravings within the document. But if I've got a collection of letters, It's no good just saying, I've got letters from Paul Kruger to Jan Smuts. I want to be able to say that on the 1st of June 1900 at Machadodorp, there was a letter from the one to the other, and this is what it dealt with. And so you would do a detailed contents for each item. If the item was important enough, you could consider doing a record on its own and linking the two together. Restrictions here could be, if it's a donated item, there's restrictions on how it may be published, or whether it is only used for research, or it could be a restriction on access that the person, I've written about this person, but they're still alive. So the document can only be utilized in 10 years' time. That is important to know. You're keeping the document, you've got access to it, but you know you need to get, it can't be used, or you've got to get permission from the person who donated it to you for them to utilize it. So restrictions can vary. A summary of the information of the document, so that is this what I'm looking for? The language, is the document in English? Is it a mixture of English and French? Is it in Zulu? If it's not the language of the catalogue, we would specify it because it also makes it easier for users. Any important biographical or historical information which we need to keep for referencing. The binding, is it a specific binding if it's not bound at all? Is there any specific conservation work that has been done, or we know we want to make a note that it's a map, but as it's folded, the corners are tearing. So as we open it, it's fragile. And we can make a note so that we remember that it needs work, because once it goes onto the shelf, we vaguely remember there was a map that needed some work. But which one was it? So your notes are also a method of you reminding yourself about work that can be done, and again, for the conditions. So I buy a book, I can make a note that it had water damage. So I can then check that in a few years' time, if I look at the book and say, what's happened to my book or my letter? It seems to be damaged. I can check on the catalogue, it noted there was damage. Has the damage deteriorated further, or is it new? So that's the type of thing that your notes are. So they're fairly important. You will find some documents have no notes. Other documents will have a lot of notes. Again, depending on each unique situation. Subjects. Now, subjects are important because these help you retrieve the document. Some titles of books are very broad and vague. They sound pretty, but they actually tell you nothing about what's going on in the document. And so your subjects identify key people who are mentioned in the document, key events, key places, key terms, which allow you to search to retrieve the material to determine, is it relevant? When you get to personal names and corporate names, you try and utilize the most complete version you have, because you also want to standardize on one version and not have one person entering a book or a document as Jans or Smuts Jan as their search term, and the next person doing Jan Smuts Jan Christian, and the third person entering into the catalogue Smuts Jan C. They're the same person. Choose one version, utilize it, standardize, and then, if need be, create cross-references, such as Witbank, you would have a cross-reference, Emalachleni, see also Witbank, and vice versa, so that you can retrieve from as many terms and sides as possible. So there's a type of things you can include as subjects. And here I've just given you 2 examples of what a catalogue record looks like within the library. The first is a book, and you'll see it's only got 2 subjects. It's fairly comprehensive, and there's a note. The next one is a manuscript, also by Smuts. You can see that title is one that is due to be corrected, because if we just say autographed letter signed, it doesn't really tell us who, what, where, when, how, and why. So I would need to actually go into that letter and recreate that title. We're finding a lot of this, so it is ongoing. But you can see our subjects are far more in depth, and there's a lot more there's 2 notes. I didn't put all the notes in. So depending on your item, your catalogue record varies. And if this is going to work, you can see there's my accession number and there's my location. So we are able to know exactly where the document should be. And lastly, that I want to talk about briefly is what is a finding aid or a bibliographic file? This is, of course, a representation of the formal definition of or a means of access to archival materials made or received by a repository in the course of establishing administrative or intellectual control over the materials. In other words, it's the work you've done to try and understand the document. It could be your dealer notes if you've bought it from a vendor. It could be correspondence with someone for further detail or information. It could be book reviews, transcripts, etc. So a finding aid is fairly broad. It depends on what the document is. Some items will not have a finding aid because they're easy. Other documents can have a very large finding aid just to support the document. And that is, no, we're not quite. We're nearly there. Storage is important. We need to consider the storage of the document. We need to ensure that whatever we store it in is more or less the right size. If we have a loose letter in a bigger plastic sleeve and it's in a box, it can move around a bit and it's not necessarily good for the document in that it can get bent and damaged. So you'd want to keep your letters, your photographs, etc. in storage for their size. If possible, you want acid-free paper because papers release acid and you want to prevent deterioration. You'd also decide, is the item going to be stored on a shelf, in a box, in a drawer, depending on what you're looking at. Maps are best stored open and flat because the more you fold it and open it, it damages the weakening points. So you would want to look at what is best, what is ideal. Now, this is going to be a controversial, but for some places, you want to look at the building conditions because that's also part of storage. It's all good and well having these boxes that are archivally made and the documents are properly stored, but if it's in a building that isn't with the correct temperature or humidity, you could nearly be defeating the object. Documents like consistency. They don't like variation. And you would want to keep your building temperature at a constant temperature of about, I'd say, 18 to 23 degrees. You don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold, because temperature fluctuation leads to humidity fluctuation. And humidity, water, dampness affects paper and images. So again, you want to consider that and try, I'm not saying it's perfect, but try to the best of your ability to keep your archive constant. It's an ongoing battle. And your light. Be aware that certain things fade with light. Watercolors don't like being out in the light. Photographs fade. Oils survive a bit longer. So be aware of what am I displaying, how long are things up on display, is it the best for that material? We'll put it up, we keep rooms in darkness, We keep rooms closed to prevent further damage. So those are things to think about when looking at your storage. Digitization. A big question. Do we digitize? Don't we digitize? Who's going to fund it? Again, you would need a policy for this. Develop a policy where you specify what is the aim of digitization, how you are going to do your digitization, what process, where you're going to store it, and how is it going to be accessible. You need to also identify key works compared to, do we digitize everything, or do we digitize those that are more fragile first and then go on? Are we going to do it in batches? Are we going to just start at number one and work forward? So that's all got to be decided before you actually do this, because that also helps with identifying what funding we need. Also, your process. Are you going to get a photographer in to do the digitization and add all the metadata? Or are you going to just go to your local postnet and scan the documents? Is that ideal? Can I scan the letter book? Am I going to damage it by scanning? Do I need to photograph it instead? And then I've now got these files. Am I going to store them in JPEG? Am I going to store them in TIFF? Where am I going to store them? Are they backed up? How am I going to access it? Who's going to do the metadata for easy retrieval? And that is the end of my problem. Any questions?